In the late 19th century, Africa was a continent under siege. Far away in Europe, powerful nations gathered around a map, carving up an entire continent, piece by piece. Ancient kingdoms were dismantled, new borders were drawn right through them, and sovereignty simply vanished. By the year 1900, nearly all of Africa was ruled by a foreign power. But there was one empire that refused to be erased from the map, one nation that did not bow to colonial treaties or accept European domination. Instead, it faced a modern European army head-on and defeated it in open battle. This is the story of how Ethiopia preserved its independence, how the Battle of Adwa changed the course of history, and why Ethiopia became a global symbol of resistance in an age of empire. Between 1881 and 1914, European powers engaged in what's now known as the Scramble for Africa. Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, and Italy all raced to claim land, resources, and influence. At the Berlin Conference, European diplomats literally divided the continent among themselves, completely ignoring the African leaders and people who actually lived there. They claimed they were on a civilizing mission, but the real goals were economic exploitation and national prestige. Italy, a newly unified country, was desperate to build its own colonial empire and prove its strength. It looked at the map and set its sights on one of the oldest empires in the world, Ethiopia. But Ethiopia was not a collection of divided tribes waiting to be conquered. It was an ancient, centralized empire with a rich history, a recognized monarchy, and a sophisticated system of diplomacy. At the helm was Emperor Menelik II, a brilliant and strategic leader who saw Europe's colonial ambitions for what they were, and like many other rulers, Menelik didn't isolate his nation. He actively studied European politics, engaged with foreign powers, and began a rapid program of modernization. He imported modern firearms, unified rival regions under his command, and built a formidable army. Ethiopia wasn't just preparing for trade, it was preparing for war. In 1889, this looming conflict took a critical turn. Italy and Ethiopia signed a treaty, known as the Treaty of Wuchel. But there was a problem. The treaty was written into languages, and the two versions said completely different things. The Italian version stated that Ethiopia must conduct all its foreign affairs through Italy, effectively making it an Italian protectorate. However, the Amharic version, which Menelik signed, said that Ethiopia could, if it chose to, use Italy as a diplomatic channel. This wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate mistranslation by the Italians. When Italy proudly announced to the world that Ethiopia was now its colony, Menelik II firmly rejected the claim. Diplomacy was over. War was now inevitable. In early 1896, Italy launched its invasion, fully expecting an easy and rapid victory. European newspapers confidently predicted that the primitive Ethiopian army would collapse in a matter of days. They couldn't have been more wrong. Emperor Menelik II had rallied a massive, unified force of over 100,000 soldiers from across Ethiopia's diverse regions. This army was not only fiercely patriotic but also well-armed with modern rifles and led by generals who knew the mountainous terrain like the back of their hands. On March 1, 1896, near the town of Adwa, the Italian forces marched into a trap. They were outmaneuvered, outnumbered, and completely overwhelmed. The Ethiopian army descended upon the invading columns, and the battle turned into a decisive, catastrophic defeat for Italy. For the first time in the modern era, a European colonial power had been resoundingly defeated by an African army on the battlefield. The victory was total. The news of the Battle of Adwa sent shockwaves across the globe. The long-held myth of European military invincibility was shattered. For Africans and people of African descent everywhere, from the Caribbean to the United States, Ethiopia became a powerful symbol of black pride, resistance, and freedom. The victory at Adwa forced Italy to sign a new treaty, one that fully recognized Ethiopia's sovereignty and independence, while the rest of the continent fell under colonial rule. Ethiopia stood alone, a beacon of hope. Now, some people point to the 1930s, when Fascist Italy under Mussolini briefly occupied Ethiopia. But occupation is not the same as colonization. The Italian forces never established full administrative control. They never dismantled Ethiopia's ancient institutions, and their rule was constantly challenged by fierce Ethiopian resistance. In 1941, with British help, Ethiopia was liberated, and its monarchy, its statehood, and its unique cultural identity remained intact. This distinction is crucial. So why isn't this monumental story taught more widely in our schools? Because Ethiopia's victory directly challenges the colonial narrative that Africa was a passive continent, powerless against European might. It proves that colonization wasn't some inevitable destiny. It highlights the power of African strategy, unity, and leadership. This story is often pushed to the footnotes of history because it disrupts the convenient myth of European superiority. The legacy of Adwa is a powerful reminder that Ethiopia's independence was not an accident. It was earned through foresight, diplomacy, and an unbreakable will to remain free. The Battle of Adwa is one of the most important moments in modern history, not just for Africa, but for the entire world. It teaches us that sovereignty was fiercely defended, not simply surrendered, and that the real story of our past is far more complex and inspiring than we've been led to believe. If this history was new to you, you're not alone. If it challenged what you learned in school, that's the entire point. Subscribe to our channel for more untold history, told accurately and without apology. Thank you for watching.